bang, and your warlord is gone. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our minis on the tabletop. Today we'll be continuing in our Space Marine unit review series, and going back for a second look at one of the deadliest and most feared units in the Space Marines arsenal, the Eliminator squad. Now these guys are honestly one of my favourite units in the Space Marine Codex at the moment. When I was taking my first few faltering steps making this channel, they were one of the first videos that I did, back when the mic was all crackly. I didn't have any sort of format for making these videos, and I hadn't worked out how to change the picture from one thing to another on the YouTube video yet. We're now a little bit further along from that, so I thought it was time to go back and give Eliminators the attention that they deserve. Particularly now since I made that first video, we've gained a lot of very important new codexes and supplement books that give these horrendous snipers all sorts of new ways to eliminate their targets. So in this video we'll take a look at their datasheet, a discussion of their options, any obvious ways that we can get more out of them on the tabletop through buffs and unit synergies, and how I have been running them on the tabletop myself over the last few months. In the background, the Eliminators are a sniper unit clad in Mark 10 Phobos armour, and are deployed with the Vanguard Primaris Space Marines. Their sniper weapon of choice is the Mark III Shrike Pattern Bolt Sniper Rifle, whose thermoscopic scopes have precision Auspexes that can penetrate several feet of solid matter, allowing nowhere for their targets to hide. Operating from concealed positions, the Eliminators can choose a variety of lethal rounds that they can select to tailor to their specific situation. Hyperfrag rounds detonate in a volley of shrapnel cutting through enemy infantry. Executioner rounds can curve around solid obstacles, giving their targets nowhere to hide. And mortis rounds carry a payload of mutagenic toxins, so you don't only get shot, but also dissolved as well. All very nasty. So let's see how these long-ranged murderers perform on the tabletop. So Eliminators are a heavy support choice for Codex Space Marines, and they'll cost you 72 points for a squad of 3 of them bearing bolt sniper rifles. You get 3 in a squad, no more no less, and the squad consists of 1 Eliminator Sergeant and 2 Eliminators. They pretty much have the standard Primaris stat line: Movement 6, Weapon Skill and Ballistic Skill 3 up, Strength and Toughness 4, 2 wounds, 2 attacks, Leadership 7 and a 3 up save, and of course the Sergeant has an extra attack and pip of Leadership. Their 3 up save typically will be augmented by their camo cloaks, which means that when they're in cover they have +2 to cover saves, rather than just +1, meaning they'll typically be on a 1+ save, though of course 1s will always fail. Each model is equipped with a bolt sniper rifle, bolt pistol, frag and crack grenades and that camo cloak, and any squad member can choose to swap out that bolt sniper rifle for a las fusil, which will cost you an additional 12 points. This will put a full squad of las fusils at 108 points. So let's take a look at the stats of their main guns. Firstly, the bolt sniper rifle can fire those 3 different types of bolt sniper rounds that we mentioned. First of all we have the mortis round, which is the primary armament and the one that you'll be firing most of the time. It's 36 inches, heavy 1, strength 5, AP-2, damage D3, and it has the usual sniper rule for when you roll a 6+ to wound, you'll suffer an additional mortal wound in addition to the regular damage. As sniper weapons, these can all target characters, even if they're not the closest enemy unit. Now the mortis round is just a fantastic weapon for hunting characters. Wounding on 3s with that strength of 5, AP-2 to chew through high armor saves, and damage D3 to actually make it count when it gets a wound off. And the mortal wound effect is just icing on the cake. These synergize incredibly well with the guided aim special rule, which we'll mention now. Guided aim is the option for your sergeant to forego his shooting for the other 2 members of the squad to add +1 to their hit and wound rolls. This is exceptionally good on the mortis rounds, as typically those 2 other shots will be hitting on 2s and wounding on 2s for every toughness 4 character, and also they'll get those mortal wounds off on a 5 or 6, not just a 6. This increases the damage of the mortis rounds even more than the other weapons because of that mortal wound effect. Against your standard Space Marine hero character, something in power armor like a librarian without an invul save, you'll typically get around 2.5 wounds just from these mortis rounds in the guided aim ability alone. They're really not to be underestimated, even unbuffed by anything. For those that are interested, guided aim is one of those abilities that sounds like it might not be that powerful. Give up a third of your unit's shooting to have +1 to hit and wound. Doesn't actually sound like the best deal, unless you do the maths. It actually maths out that on average you will do more damage against all targets provided you're hitting on a 3-up and wounding on a 3-up or worse. That basically encompasses virtually any situation that you're firing those mortis rounds on. The only times when you wouldn't use guided aim, when you have a full squad of 3 eliminators, is if you have something like Chapter Master rerolls, or a different source of +1 to hit and wound, say like the Raven Guard character hunting ability in Tactical Doctrine. Or if you lose one of your eliminators, it makes more sense to fire both of your remaining eliminators, rather than use guided aim on just one guy. But basically the rule is, while you have a full squad of 3 eliminators, use guided aim every single time, unless you're in one of those very specific scenarios. Now we've got that out of the way, let's look at the Executioner and Hyperfrag rounds. Executioner rounds are 36-inch heavy 1 weapons with strength 5, AP -1 and damage 1. It can target enemies that aren't visible to the bearer, ignores cover, and adds +2 to the hit roll, so it basically has a whole raft of utility abilities, but in general it will be weaker than the Mortis rounds at taking out characters if you do have line of sight. The time that you use this one is when you don't have line of sight to an enemy character. Say there's something like an enemy warlock clinging to life with just 1 wound left, hiding out of line of sight in some ruined basements. These guys can happily plink away at him, even without direct line of sight. In terms of guided aim for this one, you don't really want to bother with guided aim, due to this one's ability to add 2 to the hit roll, which means that you're not using guided aim as much, so it's just not worth bothering with. Finally, we come to the Hyperfrag round, which is 36-inch range, heavy D3, strength 5, AP 0 and damage 1. Again, it can target characters if they're not the closest, but otherwise has no special abilities. This is the one that you want to use if you're only looking at thinning out some very lightly armoured hordes. It is marginally better than the Mortis round against anything with a 6-up save, or 1 wound demons that have a 5-up invul save and no other protection. The uses for this one are a bit limited. In all honesty, you're really not going to be getting the best value out of your eliminators if you're using them to try and take down hordes, because they're just not really designed to do that. So I'd only use this one as a last resort to plink away at some infantry, if there really are no other viable targets available. Next, let's take a look at the las fusils. They're 36-inch range, heavy 1 weapons with strength 8, -3 and 3 damage, so are a decent all-round anti-tank weapon that will be strongest at taking out toughness 7 vehicles without an invul save. I did a bit of math hammer in my Eliminators versus Hellblasters and Suppressors video, and the Eliminators came out as the best at taking out Lehman Russes or Rhinos, for example. The way I like to set up my las fusil squads is to have the Sergeant armed with a bolt carbine to save on points, and then 2 Eliminators armed with las fusils as the other 2, and just use the guided aim ability every turn. Again, mathematically you will get more damage out of your Eliminators if you use guided aim every turn, unless you have Chapter Master rerolls, or are either hitting or wounding on 2s, say for example if you're shooting at some toughness 4 infantry, which frankly most of the time aren't going to be the first choice for your las fusils. When your Eliminators get shot and then lose casualties, I'd remove the Sergeant with the bolt carbine first, so you still have those 2 pricey las fusils to blaze away at the enemy. In Devastator Doctrine, your standard 2 las fusil on bolt carbine Eliminator squad will do 4.1 wounds to your standard toughness 7 3-up save vehicle, so for their points cost they do plough through them pretty efficiently. Just as a side note, if you did equip them all with las fusils, which would cost 10 points extra, and you didn't use guided aim, you'd only get an average of 4 wounds out of them, so essentially you'd be getting less damage output for a higher points investment. That's why I always recommend using the bolt carbine to save points. Talking of that bolt carbine, the Instigator bolt carbine is the Sergeant's option that the Eliminator squad can take. Now the Instigator bolt carbine costs 2 points more than a bolt sniper rifle, and 10 points less than a las fusil. In terms of its actual shooting, it is pretty unimpressive. It's a 24-inch Assault 1 weapon with strength 4, AP -1 and flat damage 2 that also has the ability to snipe characters. To put it bluntly, this thing is worse than a bolt sniper rifle, firing a mortis round by a very long way. The reason that you take this though is its covering fire special rule. The first time that this Eliminator Sergeant fires Overwatch with an Instigator bolt carbine, this unit can, after it has resolved its Overwatch, move as if it were the movement phase. Now this is a potentially really powerful ability, because it allows you to have your Overwatch shooting and then scurry away 6 inches further from the charge, meaning that most of the time your opponent's charge range will increase by 6 inches. Even if he were standing right next to you when he declared the charge, he'd now really have a decent chance of failing it, and say if your opponent was charging you out of deep strike, you'd now make that charge absolutely impossible to achieve. So it is a powerful special rule, and the loss in firepower doesn't really matter too much, as most of the time you'd be making use of guided aim. For me, it's kind of a take it or leave it upgrade. You really don't want your eliminators being charged in the first place, so hopefully that special rule isn't going to be coming into effect most of the time, provided you're screening them properly with other units. Having said that, in some situations it's going to be absolutely punishing to your opponent being unable to charge your eliminators, and paying 2 points for that privilege over a bolt sniper rifle isn't so bad. And as I've already said, I prefer it on the las fusil eliminators, just to save 10 points for no loss in damage output, so this special rule for them is just a really nice bonus. In terms of other special rules, the eliminators of course have Angels of Death, so combat doctrines will be very important, improving the AP of all of the weapon types when you're in the Devastator doctrine, so that's AP -3 Mortis rounds, AP -2 Executioner rounds, and AP -4 las fusils. These guys really like Devastator doctrine. They also have Shock Assault, so in the first round of combat they will be punching with 3 attacks each and 4 for the Sergeant. Combat isn't ideal for them, but they can still take out a decent number of light infantry. Finally, they also have Concealed Positions, so this is your scout type deployment option, allowing them to set up anywhere that's greater than 9 inches away from your opponent and their deployment zone when you set them up on the battlefield. Now, I've seen plenty of people be a little bit over eager with their eliminators and set them up right near to my army. I try and be a little bit cautious with them. They aren't weak to enemy shooting, but they also aren't the strongest defensive unit either, and just having them wiped out turn 1 because you're a little bit keen to get the absolute best shots off with them is not exactly ideal. Having said that, that 36-inch range isn't as big as you might expect sometimes, and it can be helpful for them to be perching on a high terrain piece in the midfield, or perhaps even securing an objective on a fairly far-flung part of the battlefield, popping off those mortis rounds all game long. So I'd say don't be overzealous with this, but being able to take up optimal positions in a suitable piece of midfield cover is pretty good. So overall, eliminators are a generally great all-round firepower unit. Those mortis round bolt rifles will basically make a mess of any character or heavy infantry, and will also do a decent amount of damage to vehicles, and those las fusils are a good dedicated Primaris anti-tank option to carve through vehicles without invul saves. They'll be happiest squatting in cover, plinking off the shots at fairly long range, and soaking up a decent amount of return firepower due to those camo cloaks. So let's see what sort of other tricks we can use to get more out of them on the table. Firstly, let's look at the various chapters we can field them with, and these guys really get a lot out of several of the different chapter options. Firstly, Imperial Fists are a really solid option, as they have a boosted Devastator doctrine. +1 damage against vehicles is great to help out those las fusils against their intended targets, and also is really good for mortis rounds against vehicles, as every wound that gets through will give you an average of 3 damage. As if that weren't enough, they'll ignore cover, and also all of the bolt sniper rifle rounds will get extra hits on modified 6s. In particular, mortis round eliminators in Imperial Fists will be absolutely lethal against any heavy targets, and will give you some of the most efficient Space Marine firepower in the Codex for Imperial Fists. Iron Hands are another very solid one, again due to wanting to operate in Devastator Doctrine to help out those sniper rifles and las fusils. 6-up Feel No Pain for better durability and a better overwatch are all great, but the main thing that they get out of Iron Hands is their boosted Doctrine, which will allow them to move and shoot with heavy weapons for no penalty, and also reroll 1s to hit. Both of these are just epic advantages for eliminators, as it means that you can safely put them out of line of sight behind cover turn 1, have them safe from fire, and then move them forward to be able to line up their shots turn 1. They'll hit on 3s, and they'll even reroll 1s, which is actually a pretty handy bonus for them, as in general I find Eliminator squads are squads that you really want to be having operate independently, so being able to self-buff is just great. In terms of successor chapters, both Master Artisans and Stealthy can help these guys out. The Master Artisans rerolls synergize so well with an Eliminator squad. They only have 2 or 3 shots most of the time, so rerolling their few failed misses and wound rolls will get them to be incredibly reliable, particularly as you can combine this with either the Imperial Fists or Iron Hands Doctrine. Stealthy will also let you get those camo cloaks boosted saves wherever you are, whether you're in cover or not, and certainly doesn't hurt. In terms of other chapters, Salamanders will also be great for those rerolls. Raven Guard are another awesome choice for eliminators, having +1 to hit and wound characters, means that you won't even need to use guided aim, and you can have all 3 of their bolt rifle shots, all hitting and wounding on 2s. Being -1 to hit when they're in cover also ups their survivability, which is great as it covers one of their weaknesses. The Eliminator Sergeant can also take Ex Tenebris or the Corvadi bolts, 2 decent sniper relics. Ultramarines also aren't so bad for Eliminators, mainly due to being able to move and shoot without penalty, due to being Scions of Guilliman. And the new Dark Angels, with inbuilt reroll 1s if they remain stationary, and a bonus 6-inch range, are certainly a very strong choice for a camping Eliminator squad. 42-inch range on the snipers and las fusils really will allow you to put them a little bit further back and keep them more safe and out of harm's way, so I think they're a great choice for Dark Angels. Moving on, in terms of character buffs that they can access, naturally your captains, lieutenants and chapter masters of all stripes will certainly help out Eliminator squads, though as small units who often want to deploy out of the way, they aren't always as motivational to castle up as some of the other Space Marine units, but this is certainly something that you can do with them. They do get a little bit less value out of the chapter master rerolls, however, as it's only a marginal buff over using guided aim, which they won't want to do if they do have those rerolls. Other than that, you can do some fancy tricks with Phobos Librarians, though as small squads I don't typically find that it's the most efficient use of psychic buffs, and Chaplain Litanies could also apply to them too, maybe the +1 to hit litany, though again as quite small units they're not really the strongest target for using single unit buffs on. In terms of stratagems, the same applies really. Small units don't get as much benefit. Auspex scan is usually one to consider if the enemy does wind up deep striking right next to you, particularly if that enemy happens to be a cheeky smash captain trying to come in and break your eliminators with a thunderhammer. Some mortis rounds might send him packing, and transhuman physiology could help your eliminators survive into the next round. Very expensive at 2 CP for such a small unit, but at toughness 4 with a very high armor save, you might frequently get strength 8 or 9 weapons targeting them to give you some good value out of this stratagem. So how would I use eliminators in game then? Of the loadouts, my preferred one is the bolt sniper rifle eliminators. They're just so cheap and they've just got such great generalist firepower that there isn't ever a game that they aren't a thorn in the side of my opponent until they're removed. I typically recommend taking 3 units if you're taking any, just for reliability and threat saturation, and particularly as you might half kill a character with one squad, and it's great to have another squad to finish off that key character as a follow-up volley. I've been running them with the Iron Hands Master Artisan Stealthy combo, so I'll be typically deploying them out of sight, moving forwards, rerolling 1s to hit, and then also rerolling 1 hit and wound roll per turn. It means that with the guided aim, we're almost guaranteed to get 2 successful wounds on an enemy character, and these guys very reliably take out any HQ choice that sticks its head above the parapet. Anecdotally, they've claimed the skulls of Eldrad, various Custody characters, Morgan Ra, just over the course of a few games, and particularly with Master Artisans you often can roll very highly against vehicles as well. On average these guys will do around 2 to 3 wounds against things like Imperial Knights, with those mortal wounds being great at chewing through invul saves. Interestingly enough, at things with toughness 8 and also a decent invul save, the bolt sniper rifles actually outcompete the las fusils point for point, so that is something to bear in mind, particularly as the bolt sniper rifles will be more durable, point for point, as it costs less for the same defensive profile. I know this isn't the only way to field eliminators. Being Raven Guard or Imperial Fists will also make them into hilarity levels of dangerous. There's really a lot of ways that you can play these guys and have them perform well. Actually on the tabletop, when it comes to deployment, I typically found myself deploying my eliminators on the flanks of the army, always in cover, ideally near an objective, and if I'm going second, typically out of line of sight. They aren't bad with defense, but compared with other threats in your army, they might be less durable, particularly against high strength damage to weapons such as plasma weapons and the like. I'd say it is usually going to be worth setting them up out of line of sight and moving forward even if you are taking the hit penalty, as a bunch of decent sniper shots beats no sniper shots because they all got shot turn 1. In terms of setting them up, you also want to consider the lines of sight they're going to have. If there are any big ruins or high terrain pieces in the game, then that would also be a very good place to put them, as it'll also give them decent protection against assault. From there you just have to utilise their excellent firepower to plink off the targets of your choice. Typically they are going to get the most out of the investment, picking on characters, presuming they are armed with the bolt sniper rifles, and from there either vehicles with a high points per wound cost, or plinking out elite infantry are probably going to be where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. If you're using las fusils, then their ideal prey is going to be vehicles and high multi-wound infantry without invul saves, in particular things like Lehman Russ tanks, Space Marine aggressors, or Rhino chassis variants are going to be exactly what they want to be shooting. I might be tempted to play a little bit more conservatively with las fusil eliminators, just because they cost a fair bit more points, so even more than the bolt sniper variant, you don't want them to be taken out early and lose that investment. Just to clarify, I really don't think las fusils are by any means bad, they're still very efficient, I just prefer the utility and character killing ability that the bolt sniper rifles bring to the table. If we're looking at a few fun numbers now, the Iron Hands Eliminators with Master Artisans will be doing an average of 3.7 wounds to your typical Space Marine character without an invul save once you've factored in the mortal wounds. Raven Guard ones with 3 shots firing in their boosted tactical doctrine will do very slightly better at 3.8 wounds and will be better against invul targets due to getting more mortal wounds from the mortis rounds. If we take aim at some vehicles, the Iron Hands Master Artisans and Stealthy variant will do an average damage of 7 wounds to an Imperial Knight when you have 3 squads of them, and Imperial Fists ones, when they're in their boosted Devastator doctrine, will do slightly better with 8.2 wounds. For 3 72-point squads that are better suited to taking aim at characters, this really isn't such a bad damage output. In terms of competitors, the main in-Codex comparison that the Eliminators have are Space Marine Scouts with sniper rifles. In terms of firepower, the Eliminators basically just win against all targets. I did a side-by-side comparison of the 2 units in a recent video, so feel free to check that out after you've finished this if you're interested. The Scouts do have some decent advantages of their own though. Being troops, it means they'll fill detachments and earn you more command points for filling out battalions, which is always good. And they're also more durable against high strength, high AP weaponry, which can end the Eliminators very fast if they get a few wounds through. So there are some trade-offs, but on the whole, out of the 2, I would argue that the Eliminator squad is much stronger than them. Out of Codex, Vindicare Assassins are another strong contender. They don't have quite as much damage output point for point, but they do have the advantage of being characters that aren't targetable, so your opponent can't just shoot them dead. Unfortunately for Space Marines, Vindicares break the combat doctrines rule, meaning that you'll lose combat doctrines if you were otherwise pure Space Marines and include an assassin. So I don't really see many people using Vindicares over Eliminators if they are in an otherwise pure Space Marine list. Overall, I really like the Eliminator squad. They are a solid, very competitive option for Codex Space Marines, and I've been certainly surprised by the sheer brutal efficiency with which they can dispatch characters on the tabletop. I'll certainly be using them in competitive games and tournaments going forward. Thanks very much for listening. If you have any advice or guidance with the use of Eliminators on the tabletop, please let me know down in the comments below. It has been fun going back to take a proper look at them. Now we have a lot more options. If you'd like to see more from Auspex Tactics, feel free to subscribe to the channel. We have new Warhammer 40k Tactics content every day, with plenty of Space Marine goodness going around. I do have a Patreon page for the channel, and if you are enjoying my videos, feel free to help me out there. I'd really like to get to the point where the channel can be something I focus on a bit more as an actual source of income, rather than just a part-time hobby I do in weekends and evenings, and the Patreon page is a big part of allowing that to happen. And of course, a big thank you to all of my current Patreons. You guys are just fantastic. Thanks again for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.